Welcome to the J&J Show. I'm Jeff, he's Jerry, and today we are going to continue our discussion on the missing 411 that was started by David Politis when he was asked to look into it by some Rangers back in, what is it, about 10 years ago, Jerry, I think?
Yeah, maybe 12. Yeah.
Maybe 12. So today we're going to get into a little bit. He has actually started coming out with what he thinks is causing these disappearances, but I think today we're going to start off this part two with a discussion about some mass disappearances that have happened that he hasn't covered. I know you mentioned before we came on the air, Jerry, you mentioned some that happened on sea and during World War II. And if you want to go ahead and start us off with that.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of stuff. And of course, David hasn't really gone into these, and they just during the since the last episode that we did, I've just been thinking about them, and not all of these are necessarily fall under the missing 411, but certainly enough of them have occurred to where it makes you wonder. The one that I grew up hearing about from my dad was the famous case of the Mary Celeste, which was a ship that was found. It was it the 60s, 50s, 60s, somewhere around there. I have to look that up. And it was basically afloat with no one aboard. And there was evidence that the crew had been on the vessel not long before it was found, but there was no sign. Nobody was ever found. Things like this. It's not automatic. It is kind of funny. You don't automatically go to the strange and unusual, because there can be events that can occur. Somebody, but some, also you have to be reasonable. Somebody could say, well, it could have been an explosion and they all could have jumped off the ship. Well, if there was an explosion, you would have seen, stuff that could have been blown in pieces or shards of wood everywhere. The vessel was in perfect shape. So a lot of times with these, you don't have to necessarily automatically go with the most extreme choice of the cause of the people's disappearance. But yet, also, a lot of times with these, you find that there is not a good explanation as to another good example is the lost colony. I mean, it's called the lost colony for a reason. And they have tried and tried. I know people are convinced that they've found the lost colony and whatnot, and maybe they have, but there are enough of these types of disappearances that have gone on through the centuries that really makes you wonder. We know that people are disappearing individually. We know that for a fact and under very strange circumstances. That's not open for debate. They flat out are. We've showed their pictures in the last. There's all sorts of images and pictures of these people who once existed. They went for a hike. Sometimes they went for a drive. Sometimes they went out on a boat, and were never seen again. So that is not open for debate whatsoever. These people have disappeared. The debate is about the why of it. There have also there are accounts of individuals. There was a lighthouse where the relief came at the for the lighthouse. The people were had disappeared. You have a similar incident occurred in Mass with a large number of Chinese troops that supposedly the Nanjing Battalion in World War II, which were fighting the Japanese and the CBI, the China Burma India Theater, and allegedly an entire battalion of Chinese troops went missing. And the relief came to relieve them in the morning. They were nowhere to be seen. And the trenches were empty in their sector. And it was an important sector. And you can say, well, they could have all been captured. Well, that's possible. It could have been. Although what's very unusual is that all the forward observers, the listening posts that were out front, they were all still out there. They had to be called in. So what's the likelihood the Japanese managed to get by the listening post, round up an entire battalion and get out? And oh yeah, by the way, the Japanese never made mention of having captured a whole battalion. So things like this that occur, and it could be folklore. I mean, perhaps that never occurred. But then I've come across accounts of villages in remote Alaska back around the turn of the 20th century, where somebody will stumble in to the village, and it was very much like the Mary Celeste. The campfires were still warm. There was evidence that the inhabitants had been there up till recently, and there was not a soul to be found in this. It was a, I don't know if it was an Inuit village, but it was a First Nations American Indian village that was out in Nowhereville, and this trapper would often stop in there. And on one occasion, when he stopped in, there was no one there. Now, a lot of these things can take on, like lore and legend, and especially considering that I'm not able to give details on all of these. It sounds more like just random stories. But the things that I mentioned are things that I've read the details myself, and the details were there. I'm not throwing out stuff that I've heard secondhand or third hand. These are accounts that I've read. It's just that I don't have them all in front of me right now. Uh, the Flight 19 is another one. Now, again, the Flight 19, for those who aren't aware, you had 5 Navy Avengers torpedo planes in December 1945 that went out on a training mission off the eastern coast of Florida, out over what is known as the Bermuda Triangle. And they were going out and to make a practice making torpedo runs, the training practice mission. And somehow they got turned around. We know how they got turned around. The lieutenant in charge, Lieutenant JG in charge, his compass went out, as is often is the case in Bermuda Triangle. And they got turned around. And there's a lot to it. It's very, very disturbing story. Even if there's nothing out of the ordinary that occurred, it's really, you feel for the people that were involved, because we have the radio transmission that were taken between the control towers and the squadron, and at different times the members of the squadron, or the flight, I should say, it was not an entire squadron, it was a flight. You could tell that they're realizing that they're in a desperate situation. It's getting dark. They're queuing on different pieces of land that they're seeing, but it's not lining up with where they think they are. So they're just not sure. At one point, one of the guys says, if we would just turn west and fly for 10 minutes, we would be over Florida. But it goes, once it gets dark, it goes bad fast. And in the end, the transmission eventually cut out, and no trace of any one of the Avengers was ever found. And they sent out a PBY to search for them, and it vanished as well. And what happened with it, they found out later, it had an explosion on board, and it crashed into the sea. This is not the first time. And the two things with this story that I noticed, because I tend to lean with this one toward it probably was just a fact of the compasses went out and they got turned around and they ran out of gas. But it's still very odd that with 5 airplanes, you wouldn't have had, there wasn't bad weather that was going on at the time. Now, bad weather did set in, which is what we hear with the 411 all the time. As soon as the PBY left, the weather became terrible. And you can count on this with these 411s. It's just like clockwork. You hear it over and over and over. And so 2 things. One is that the people sent out to help also fell into tragedy. I've come across that in a couple of the 411 missing for, not always. It is rare, but I have come across it where the people that went out to help also disappeared and were never seen as well. And then also there was a strange comment that has always been reported that the lieutenant in charge said that nothing appears as it should. At one point when he was starting to get nervous, he said that nothing appears as it should. Now, it's been claimed since then that he never said that. that is not in the records. I don't know if he said it or not. I know it was reported a lot that he said that. And the reason why I bring that up is because another case that people can listen to if they want, and this is about as close as you can get to becoming a 411, a missing 411, and yet not going missing, was a lady who by the name of Liana. And she had written in, it's August 14th on Steve Ishdall's show, the Facts by How to Hunt is the name of his channel. The Facts, just type in the Facts by How to Hunt. And it's the August 14th episode. And she writes in a very long letter about all the accounts that she's had interactions with these squatches, with these hairy giants. And as I listened to this, it was long, but it was really something to take in, because she starts out being very skeptical. And then as she has encounters, she becomes more and more aware of what's going on and comes to the exact same conclusion, Jeff, that you and I have, except she she does it firsthand. She's at one of her encounters. She's at a party. It was her sister's wedding party or some sort of birthday party, and she knew the people in the neighborhood. This little neighbor, it wasn't really a neighborhood, it was just a collection of houses out in the country. And she happened to know the people that lived around. I guess she had stayed at her sister's house. She said she looked out, and you can listen to this. I mean, you can go listen to it. It's like I said, it's on that episode. Um, and she saw the neighbor across the street looked very, very upset, visibly agitated. And she thought that was kind of odd. So she started walking across the street, and another neighbor had walked over to this guy as well, was asking what the problem. And she heard the guy say, "That darn monster is out there again." And they said, "What on earth are you walked up? What on earth are you talking about?" And she noticed as she walked up that he had a nice garden with a fence around, electric fence around it, and it had been torn all to pieces. And he pointed over across the wheat field to this tree line, and she said there stood this thing uh, standing out in the field, and it was turning and looking back into the woods like there was others in there that didn't want to show themselves. And this one was actually grinning at them with a very sadistic grin. And then it would go back behind a tree and peek at them. And she said that was all that she wanted to see. She went back to the party, and she said later she heard gunshots, and she said she hoped that he had shot the darn thing because she's come to hate him. I'm going somewhere with this story. This wasn't just a random Sasquatch story. She later told her sister and brother-in-law, you might want to talk with your neighbors about some of the stuff they're encountering because it's concerning. And he was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, they have basically there's giants in the woods around there." And he looked at her like she was crazy and whatnot. But anyhow, to get back to the party, she got back to the party and they finished out. And then she decided she was going to drive, was it either 7 miles or 11 miles to her mother's house. She lived somewhere else in the country at this time, so I guess she had to rent a car. But she knew the way from her sister's to her mother's, had driven it many times. This was all in Michigan, by the way. And she knew the roads like the back of her hand. So she takes off and is going. And as she's going down these country roads, very remote country roads, she all of a sudden noticed she's missed her turn and things don't look right. And I keyed in on that. As soon as she said that, things didn't look right. I thought about Johnson. I'm pretty sure it was Lieutenant Johnson with the Flight 19. And she said there was debris in the road. Nothing, she said it just didn't, all of a sudden it began to get dark sooner than she thought it would get dark. She began to feel nauseous. She said it was almost like things started going in slow motion. She was feeling very confused, very sleepy, like she was slowing down. She knew something was not right, but she didn't know what. So the car comes to a stop. There's nobody, no traffic coming either direction. This road looks like it hasn't even been driven on. So she calls her husband. She said her husband could tell as soon as he heard her voice something wasn't right. And she just told him, I need you to help me navigate. And then she said, better yet, I need you just to pray. I'm in trouble. And as soon as she said that, she said it was like the car rocked, and it was like somebody had flung a huge shag carpet on top of the car. And she looked up at the driver's window, and she said it was just skin, hair and skin mashed up against the Jeep drivers, and she could see a big hairy arm around the windshield, and this thing had come and just glommed onto her car. She said she was able to identify two nipples where the thing, this gigantic chest. She said it was probably one of the closest encounters that anyone's ever had, 3 inches in a pane of glass. And so she did the only thing that she knew to do, and she began to pray herself and to invoke the name of Jesus. And instantly, she felt strengthened. Deep down inside, she felt. And at that point, she heard a voice told her, just push the gas pedal. And she said she had to physically focus and actually almost reach out and grab her foot to put it on the gas pedal. She had slowed down so much and was fading that fast. And she pushed her knee to push the gas pedal, and the vehicle would not go. The back tires were spinning, and she felt as if the back of the vehicle was actually lifted up. But as she pressed the gas pedal, it came down, and she was able to move forward. And as she did, the further she went, the slower but more consistent she felt her energy returning. She began to almost like come out of a trance, she said. And before long, it began to get light again. And the only thing, and then she kept on going, made it to her mom's house, got out. There was no damage to the car, to the Jeep, but she did find a long, nasty hair wedged in the back part. And she said she is convinced to this day that she was almost a missing 411 case. You might say, well, that can't be. She was in a vehicle. There have been plenty of empty vehicles found. One of them was right here in the mountains of Virginia, where a lady was, the vehicle was off the side of the road, gone. And it didn't make any sense. Somebody just robbed. They robbed the, well, all the person, everything was in the car. And they just took her off, and it was a predatory thing and whatnot. They never found a body. The cadaver dogs came in, couldn't pick up a scent. I mean, rapists aren't that efficient at hiding the body. They do their job and flee. They're not able to hide a body from hundreds of searchers. So it happens. The vehicle thing, that is not a problem whatsoever. Let me take a break and let you chime in. But that really, when she said nothing seemed as it should, man, I got chills because I knew I'd heard that expression. Like, where have I heard that before? I remember Flight 19.
Well, I hear it all the time in these stories. These stories where the surroundings don't look correct and these people are driving. Actually, they're most common in the glitches in the Matrix stories. I don't know if you've ever listened to any of those. People will be driving and all of a sudden their surroundings don't look right. Or they drive by a town that isn't there when they go back. I remember one where they stopped at a gas station. They got lost because their surroundings didn't look right. So they stopped at a gas station. And for some reason, maybe it was the return trip or something, they went to look for this gas station and it wasn't there. And it was as if nothing was. It's not like it was there and it was abandoned. There was nothing there. It was just a patch of grass or forest or something. I don't really remember. It's been a long time since I heard that story, but a lot of these glitches in the Matrix stories, they mention the exact same thing. Like 1 second, everything's normal. And then the next second, nothing feels right. Like their surroundings don't feel right, or they're seeing things that shouldn't be there. And it's really weird. Maybe instead of glitches in the Matrix, they're experiencing what this woman did, because a lot of people just chalk it up to the Matrix. People believe we live in the Matrix, and they chalk these weird incidences up to glitches. But when you said that, it made me think of that, where their surroundings didn't look right, and they all of a sudden they don't recognize anything around them. Now
Right.
the trance-like state, excuse me, I've heard that in lots of cryptid stories. People all of a sudden they don't feel right, or they'll remember seeing something, then all of a sudden they'll just their next memory is waking up. Well, not really waking up, but they'll just all of a sudden be by their car, or they'll be like back down the trail that they had started down. So obviously, I mean, if these things are supernatural, they can mess with our heads. If they can, do mind speak, maybe it's possible for them to mess with our heads. But that people not feeling right and the not recognizing their surroundings are something I hear a lot. But the surroundings thing more so in glitches in the Matrix stories. Um, as for Michigan, that's a hotbed for all kinds of activity, especially
It is.
especially dogmen. There are a
Yeah.
lot of dogmen stories that come out of Michigan. But
Right.
going back to what you were saying about, we're talking about the mass disappearances, and that doesn't really tie in. Well, I mean, it's separate from the 411 because he hasn't actually covered it, but it does tie in because people are still going missing. Just
Right.
because David Politis doesn't cover it doesn't mean, well, it's not a missing 411 if he doesn't do it. But this is a worldwide phenomenon that's happening all over the place. People are just vanish for no reason. Though a couple of those stories I remember, the ship. What'd you say the name of it
The
was?
Mary the Mary Celeste.
That one, yeah. How it just kind of like floated up. Nobody was on it. They couldn't figure out why. It's like, there could be logical explanations for all these things, and that's excuse me. That's the first thing I go through. Is like you have to eliminate the logical and the rational. And once you can go through all the logical explanations and the rational explanations, you can't really rationalize what's happened. Then it shifts over into paranormal or supernatural. But I agree completely that, the ship comes floating up and there's nobody on it. You go and look, it's like maybe an explosion, but there's no damage. And then,
Right.
you go through like kind of the checklist of logical or rational reasons why the ship's just floated up with nobody on it. And then once you can eliminate all of that, then you move into, well, maybe this something else is going on here. But that's kind of how I look at all these stories that I listen to and hear and read. Is you eliminate the logical and the rational, and then that's when it starts to move into the paranormal. But it all falls under the same umbrella. All these disappearances everywhere. It's not just a United States thing. It's not just a national parks thing. People do disappear under mysterious circumstances and are never seen again. I think that's all I had. But that when you said that she turned down that road and she started to not recognize anything, I hear that a lot in the I was almost a missing 411 stories. Not necessarily that, but the feelings they get, where they get that feeling in their head where they're not thinking clearly, or everything starts to go foggy, and they can feel themselves kind of slipping away a little bit, like she was.
They say that one of the keys, now nobody's an expert on this, but one thing Politis says and others, that if people would just turn around, that seems to help dramatically. But it's so disorienting that no one really thinks about that. But just turning around and going the opposite direction apparently seems to help a lot, because there is a portal effect to a lot of this. There's a lot to a lot of this.
Oh,
And like you
actually,
said,
since you brought that up, the portal, the
mhm,
Bermuda Triangle, since this portal phenomenon is becoming more and more
right.
uh, stabilized thing, and even Scott Carpenter captured one. Do you think the Bermuda Triangle could possibly be a portal?
It seems like it's an area, like I guess the Devil's Triangle is exactly on the opposite end of the earth, off the coast of Japan. It seems as if it's definitely an area of high magnetism. And it seems like, yes, it is an area where portals, probably multiple, open up all the time and probably close all the time. I don't see how anyone at this point in time who's looked at the situation can say there's nothing unusual going on in the Bermuda Triangle. There clearly is, and we've had a very well documented case of a gentleman who survived and was hit. He basically entered one of these portals in his Cessna. It was a small airplane, and was able to travel at an unbelievable distance in a fairly short amount of time in what he described as a spiral. When he entered in, he said it was like we entered into a spiral in the clouds and we were just moving. It was like we were sliding along. And the next thing, I don't want to get the places wrong. It was like from Miami to Orlando, and he was able to do it in like 5 minutes or something. It was just ridiculous. There's no way. And he couldn't believe when he saw where he was that he had made it, but he had clearly gone into some sort of a portal or a vortex where he was able to, people might want to say a black hole or whatever, or wormhole, I should say, not a black hole, but a wormhole. And I don't know, you get into a lot of very scientific stuff that I'm not qualified to comment on, but a human being that has done this, and it was very well documented. He survived. He had somebody with him in the plane at the time, and it was, all this stuff is happening. You have to put it together. That's one of the things I wanted to talk about tonight also, is that at some point, it's amazing how many people, I guess most people, accept the version of the world that is produced by science and the media and government. And they don't question that. They believe implicitly and accept only what is accepted by those three, by the government, by science, and by the media. Whether it's, I say media, I don't necessarily mean just news media, but it could be Hollywood, whatever the case may be. And any information that's outside of that is just discarded or laughed at. But what's amazing about this is that even Christians can do it when they know full well that these same entities are 100% off the chart. They're completely wrong when it comes to the existence of God, and yet they still accept the paradigm provided by the government, the media, and science as far as their worldview goes. It blows my mind. Now, like we said, I do not subscribe to. I get tired sometimes when every single unusual thing that occurs is automatically a conspiracy. Not everything is a conspiracy. Things just happen, And my motto in life is great claims require great evidence. That's why for me personally, 9/11 was not an inside job, because the evidence that's been put forward to me personally doesn't pass the smell test. You still, you just because a major event occurs does not mean there's automatically a conspiracy. However, in the things that you and I are discussing, the missing 411, the cryptids, there is massive, overwhelming amounts of evidence. It's just that those three entities, the media, the government, science, categorically refuse to acknowledge that this could possibly be happening, or this evidence is even there. And anybody who looks at the evidence is automatically labeled a kook. Well, I'm just not willing to live like that. That's a closed-minded way of living, to ignore the evidence. Doesn't mean you have to believe everything that comes down the pike by any stretch.
Just blindly believing these entities that you were talking about, the governments and the media and stuff, it's like, you can't 100% take their word for it either, because obviously their interests are skewed. Their objectives, they have objectives and they have ultimate goals, and they're skewed one way or the other. And I'm sure they do hide this stuff. I mean, they have reasons to. They probably hide it under the mass hysteria umbrella as to why they don't want this stuff getting out there. But it's just like with recent. I don't want to get into politics here, but with recent elections and stuff, obviously the media was skewed one way, and everything, you can't believe an entity, no matter what it is, if it's skewed one way or the other, if it has
Right.
interests or ulterior motives. So the fact that people believe this stuff without doing their own research is just mind boggling to me, because it's like, how can you just sit there and blindly believe this stuff? You don't know what they're trying to accomplish by pushing a certain agenda or trying to push a certain thought or idea. So, that's one of the reasons why I always try to do my own research into topics. And, I've definitely gone down the rabbit hole with the cryptids, the missing 411, even a little bit, not to the extent I have with the first two, but the glitches in the Matrix stories. Mostly, you can usually dismiss most of those, but there are some that kind of make you wonder. And to hear you, or earlier you said people don't recognize their surroundings, and that's a common theme in some of the ones that seem a little more believable than others. But just do your own research, do your own, like, especially when it
Right.
comes to things like this. That's one of the things I used to say back before I stopped caring about politics is, how can you believe one side or the other? Do your own research and then figure it out.
Right.
It's the same thing with this. It's like, you can either believe it or not. That's, you can choose to. But, do, if you're even remotely slightly interested in any of this, do your own research, do your own digging, and then come up with, what you think. Don't let people do your thinking for you,
Right.
basically, because they always have an ulterior motive, or something that they're up to, and something that they're trying to accomplish.
Sure. A lot of it comes down to control, and I think we've seen that more in the past couple of years than ever before. That control is paramount. Controlling the people and controlling their thoughts, controlling their speech, controlling what they do. It's controlling what they eat, controlling what they believe. The people are to be controlled, and so that is the that's the motto of our day. I don't I you know it's just not the way I roll. And like I said, the evidence is there. It's very difficult. It's irresponsible to dismiss vast amounts of eyewitness testimony. And people might say, "Well, I didn't know about the eyewitness testimony." Well, ignorance is not an excuse. The information is all out there. Now, like I said in the last video, if you really don't care, then does a Christian really need to know all this stuff? I mean, a Christian, as long as they're walking with the Lord and whatnot, if they don't really know about this or follow this, I don't see where it's really going to be a problem for them. This is None of this is mandatory gospel information. You could not know about missing 411 and be in perfect standing with the Lord. However, you do have to bear in mind, put it this way: there was a gentleman who is a uh, big deal in the UFO community, and he talks about when he was young. This is a great example of how studying this stuff can probably lead to somebody's salvation or prevent them from falling away. And he was in the Catholic Church and was going to be um, christened, whatever. I'm not sure what the term really confirmed. I guess it was. And so he asked the pastor, the reverend there, the priest, if he would answer him a question. And the priest said, "Okay, I'll answer a question." And he said, "Well, if an angel was here, would I be able to burn him with that candle right over there?" And the priest looked kind of confused. Everybody laughed at the kid, 12 years old. He was a grown man telling the story. He's not a Christian to this day. I don't think he is. And the priest said, "Well, of course not, because an angel is a spirit. You can't burn a spirit." And so the boy said, "Well, then why should I be concerned about my spirit going to hell and being burned?" And he said that you could hear crickets. Nobody had an answer. Well, that's because they didn't know how to answer, because they were, as like so many Christians, they were ill equipped to answer a simple question from an unbeliever, who had a very good, very good question. It's a, how many new believers or unbelievers, why would God create demons? We've covered that on previous channels. Well, God didn't create demons. And the answer to that young man's question uh, should have been first and foremost, well, you could burn the angel if the angel lets you burn him, but I can't say if he would let you burn him or not. And also, I would say it depends on what state he's in. Is he taking on the state that was able to blind the men of Sodom and Gomorrah or wrestle with Jacob all night long? Or is he in his spiritual state? And so these questions and whatnot like that, you have to be ready, because there are people who will reject the gospel if Christians don't know their stuff. And I've seen it myself happen. And I've seen even some pretty prominent Christians get stumped with questions and and not know how to answer. And the people just, talk to the hand. If you don't know this, if your belief system can't even explain UFOs, which people are seeing, you can't laugh it off anymore. The government's admitted. We've said this on this channel over and over. It's no longer a joke. Turn the TV on. The government is admitting. The Congress is debating what to do about these things. They're admitting it. No longer an if. So how's the church going to explain that? What's the explanation? I see all the time non-Christians on these different channels saying, well, the church is stumped now. These Christians aren't going to have a way to explain this now. And I post on there, I said, far from being stumped, I've been trying to scream this from the housetops to other Christians. It basically proves what the Bible says. Far from upsetting us, I welcome discussion on this because we know what it is. We know what these things are. How many times does the Bible refer to the evil as being in the sky? It doesn't talk about down below. It talks about the powers, the prince of the air, and the Lord punishing the hosts of the heavens. It talks about all these fallen angels and the bad guys being up there, not in heaven where the Lord is, but in that intermediary, what Paul calls the second heaven. And that's their realm. That's the realm that they're going to be cast out of in Revelation 6 and Revelation 12 when they're cast down. And so this stuff is all become, but if you don't know it, you can't answer it. So that's why it's important that at least some Christians should be studying this stuff. I'm not saying that all Christians must know this in order to be saved. Of course not. But it is important because non-Christians they want answers. Many of them are desperate for answers. And I'm here to tell you, they're going to get more desperate for answers because it's coming and they know it. In some ways, like I said in the last video, the unbelievers are more perceptive in some ways than the Christians because they're not as I want to say lackadaisical, but they're not as sedentary. Christians are just, a lot of them are just kind of doing their thing, just assuming it'll work out, which can be a type of faith. But the non-Christians are, what's coming? What is it that's coming out of all this? Because it all seems to be tied together.
Yeah, the non-believers will do everything they can to try to trip a Christian up when they're talking about faith and when they're asking questions.
That's fair enough.
Yeah,
that's fair. Yeah.
Some of them aren't even interested in the answers you might give. They just want to try to trip you up to try to prove that your faith is wrong and that they're, I think it's just a self-justification thing to try to prove that, I'm living life a certain way. And, if I can trip up a believer, then I'm okay living like this, which, ultimately, hopefully they figure it out before it's too late, but they're eventually going to find out that no, it's not okay. But, they will do their best to try to trip you up. And that's another reason why you need to be armed with the facts or armed with the answers so you can answer their questions. I don't do it to try to trip them up. If you can trip them up, then that's how you know that you've gotten your message across. But you don't want to do it with malicious intent. You want to do it in a way that proves them wrong, that proves your point, because that's the whole purpose of it. That's why they're asking the questions. Is some of them do want answers, and they are willing to be persuaded to start and have a relationship with God. And I think, a lot of them, that's what it is. But there are those out there that will try to trip you up. And not to mention, if you're having a conversation with somebody who's just malicious intent trying to trip you up, think of all the people around you that are listening. If there are non-believers around you that are listening and you can sit there and you can answer every single thing this person throws at you, that's just more people that are more willing to accept the
Sure.
gospel and accept Jesus. So, that's another reason why you need to be equipped. Now, I'm not saying they're going to sit there and be like, well, tell us about UFOs and tell us about Sasquatch and stuff like that, because,
But they
but
do
yeah,
though.
right, right. They love pulling that out of their hat and be like,
Hmm.
well, explain this one, explain that one. And going back to your point about them saying that, when you said you posted on that message board that, we're not worried about this stuff that's happening, we're not worried about the UFOs, that we recognize these signs, you know we know what's coming. If you're a God believing, God fearing Christian, you study your Bible, you know what's coming. So I think, we're less likely to freak out when all this stuff starts happening, when the UFOs do. Well, I mean, they are in existence, or when, say, the cryptids are proven to be in existence, because cryptids right now are where UFOs were 10 to 20 years ago. People laughing it off. Oh, you just saw a bear.
Right.
Same thing with UFOs. Oh, it's just swamp gases, and other flimsy excuses like that. So right now, the cryptid topic is like what the UFO topic was 10 to 15 years ago,
Right.
where people would just laugh it off. So if the cryptids do eventually get proven to be true, then, or proven to be fact, proven to be, I don't want to say not proven to be true, because, I don't want to sit here and say I don't believe in it, but
Right.
proven to be fact, like the UFO thing. Like you said too, we're less likely to be shaken up. We're not trying to bury this. Like you said, we have this whole
Right.
channel that's dedicated to this stuff, that we're trying to get the message out there, and we're not going to be we're not going to be freaking out when all this stuff happens. We're going to be ready for it, because that just means it's the sign of the times, and it means that we're that much closer to going home.
Sure. And I tell you, I wasn't going to bring this up tonight. It's just coincidence. My son and I were watching just a little while ago the Mel Gibson movie Signs that came out, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that. It's been a while now. And I'd seen parts of it before. I never sat down and watched the whole thing. So we sat down and watched the whole thing. And especially the first half, when they're realizing what's beginning to take place. And for those who aren't aware, it's basically a movie about Mel Gibson and his family minus his wife. And he's a former priest, a reverend that has lost his faith. And the stories about their experience when the ETs come to Earth, and it focuses around their farmhouse, and their experience, but it also connects into what's going around the rest of the world. And you know, it's something to watch that and realize that is going to happen. Now, the thing is, the movie portrays these beings come down and they're hostile, and which of course, these entities are hostile. But when they come down, when Revelation 6, what it describes, when they come down, it's not to be hostile, it's to basically take over, and not in a hostile. They're going to lead mankind against, because at this point, when they're cast down through the portal, and they're described in Revelation 6, then mankind will realize, it says, I was reading it just this morning, mankind will realize that the day of the Lord is at hand. How will mankind know that? Because the church is gone. And you will have had these entities that have all of a sudden shown up, and they will be approached along with the governments to basically save mankind from what's coming. The world knows, and the History Channel does specials all the time about the end times and the rapture. They know what's coming. And they're going to know the day after the rapture, when they're still here, that they are in for the worst period of time in the history of the world. And our minds cannot imagine how bad it's going to be. So, with all that being the case, um, it's important for us to understand that these beings are being restrained right now. They're not allowed to show themselves. Right, they are not allowed to come out in the open and reveal. They can give glimpses, because that can't be proven, but they must stay in hiding, and that is by decree. It doesn't say it in the Bible, but The Lord still is in control of this universe, and the supernatural is not going to be revealed to mankind until the Lord decides to. And that's going to, if you look at the end times, it is a period of time when the supernatural is no longer seen as unusual. The supernatural will be considered the Antichrist and his activities. He'll be doing supernatural miracles, and people will be used to it. So that the church age, where normal as we have it, will be coming to an end very soon. And we talked about um, one thing you said earlier too that we didn't really get into, but you started to hit on it: the missing time. You see that a lot with the 411 cases, and especially with the abductions. And again, all this stuff is connected in together. In my opinion, the 411 cases are mostly uh, abductions where the individual, for example, there was one abduction, a guy named Aaron Hedges in the crazy mountains of Montana. And he was hunting up in an area, this was in 2013, somewhere around there, hunting up in an area that he hunted routinely. He hunted it so often that he had a semi-permanent camp, and then he had a cache where he kept supplies and stuff around the other side of the mountain. And he was up there hunting with some friends and said he was going to go up a couple miles to where his cache was, which curved around the mountain, and get some supplies and whatnot and do some hunting up that way, and disappeared and was never found. It was never seen again. And what they found was 11 miles away, they found his stuff. And in order for him to have gotten there, he would have had to have gotten down to where the river branched off and taken a right instead of going around to the left, which he would have known that was around the mountain to the left. But for some reason, he went to the right. And none of this makes any sense. If you watch the video of the 411, the hunted, it has him completely stymied as to how this, at one point, he apparently sat on a stone sipping coffee within sight of a farm where there was lights and houses that he could have gotten help. They found a campfire with his boots sitting side by side, and some belts off his backpack. And so the authorities began to think, well, he was hypothermic at this point, and that's why he's taking his stuff off. Well, if he was hypothermic, then why did he walk 3 more miles and still carrying his bow in his backpack at that point, but with no shoes on? How does that make any sense? And then years later, some cattle men were out there mending fences or dude ranch, whatnot, and they find his skull out there and other body parts and some belongings, a jacket and whatnot, no pants, I don't think, just out there, 11 miles. And none of it makes any sense. But it makes sense when you realize that most likely he was taken when he was walking down that road, taken, and was probably done experiments upon him or tortured and was killed. And that stuff they found, that mug, the thermos with the little cup, the shoes sitting side by side perfectly, the backpack, which was leaning up against a tree, all that was just put there to look somewhat natural. Happens all the time, just like all the number of corpses they find with the clothes on wrong, the shoes on the wrong feet, the pants on backwards. What is that? That's that they're trying to cover this stuff up, putting the clothes back on, and the bodies are found just floating in a lake somewhere, not anywhere near. So it's going on. And people say, well, there's no proof of that. There's all kinds of proof. There's thousands of people talking about being abducted. Yeah, but they're all kooks. Who says that they're all kooks? I mean, their stories all match up, what they describe. There's people, they're taking stuff out of people, foreign objects they've removed from people that have been implanted in them at a young age, and they'll go in and surgically remove these chips and whatnot that have been planted. And the stuff, when they analyze the material, it's not from this earth. I mean, how long are we going to keep our heads buried in the sand on these issues? This stuff is happening. And it all comes back, because you might ask, well, why would they do this? What Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so it shall be at the coming of the Son of Man. And that's where we are, the coming of the Son of Man. What was going on in the days of Noah? They were mixing animals, they were hybridizing with women and producing all sorts of monsters. It was all kinds of crazy mess going on. And it's going on now, just as Jesus said.
Yeah, I mean, some of these creatures that you hear described in these stories, it's like, it points directly to what you were just talking about, how they were hybridizing these creatures. They're putting these creatures together to form new creatures. And we've talked about this before too. I think Brett Baer even did a report on this, at how women are becoming pregnant after
Yeah,
after their abductions.
sure. The government
They're
admits it.
Yeah, the government has admitted it.
Yeah,
Brett Baer on Fox News did a
yeah,
report on it, and the facts are out there. People just want to turn a blind eye to it. They want to take any rational explanation, no matter how flimsy it is, and accept it as fact, because they don't want to see the truth. It's like when like you said, when these mysterious deaths where these people are just ripped to shreds, and there's canine DNA found at the scene,
right.
and it's just a pack of wild dogs. Like,
Yeah,
wild dogs don't do that. And of
right.
course, I'm talking about these reports of dog men attacking people and killing them, or uh, you know, 5-year-old kids going missing, and then they're found up a cliff, like a straight
Yeah,
up cliff where expert climbers have a hard time reaching. Oh, mountain lion dragged them up there. Mountain lion dragged them straight up a cliff. The
yeah,
expert climbers can't climb. I
right.
mean, mountain lions can climb better than expert climbers, but dragging a body along with them straight up a cliff. It's like people want to accept these rational explanations, but the rational explanations aren't rational because they don't make any sense whatsoever.
Right. There's always something, there's always, when you study this stuff, there's always a kicker that leaves you scratching your head. And just, and the stuff all connects. I was listening to an account. I don't believe all these accounts. I listen to them to hear. I take in personally the person's spirit, and whether what they sound like, and whether they know their Bible and whatnot. But there was a gentleman who had experienced hell, young gentleman, young guy who had overdosed somehow, or had some drugs that had bad stuff in it, whatnot, and had gone to hell. And he, young guy, young African American guy, talking about what he saw down there, what he experienced. And Jeff, he starts describing seeing beings down there that were a mixture of human and animal. And he said it was crazy stuff. Now here's a guy who had never studied any of this stuff, and yet he's in hell. And was he seeing the very same type creatures that are being reported topside here? That's not a coincidence. I mean, it's
Oh yeah,
uh,
of course. Nah,
you know.
that's no
How about
coincidence.
how about the people who have been abducted on UFOs and have seen squatches on board the craft? There's one famous one that was on a secular channel that talks about a giant being on board, and some of the things that go on these people report are just unbelievable as far as being satanic. It's obvious this is the devil's crew for sure. The things they're doing are pretty bad, and it's not for the faint of heart. But that's the reason why it's important to be as close to the Lord as possible.
A lot of people do link it together, the UFOs and the aliens, with the cryptids.
Sure, yeah, they
They
should.
a lot of people believe that they actually come down and drop these creatures off.
Yeah,
Or I want to say come down, because a lot of people just assume they're from space or from other planets, but really is what it's really looking more and more like is that they're interdimensional.
right.
Because if these cryptids come from behind the veil, and the aliens or the ETs or whatever you want to call them are part of the devil's army, then they too are behind the veil at this point, because they're part of the beings that will be unleashed upon the earth.
Right. We've
And
seen. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. I was finished.
We, to back that up, we have seen these giants. We've seen them old. We've seen them young. In all the years, there has never been one report that I'm aware of a squatch, a female giant, being seen expecting with a big old baby stomach, a baby bump out front. Never one, not one. So I can't prove it, but for my money, they're not producing on their own. That they're being created on these craft and dropped off, because there's a lot of eyewitnesses, normal human beings, who have reported seeing them coming off these craft. Now, nothing could sound crazier, nothing could sound more like a tabloid than that. But yet you have sane, rational people who have seen this. And once you've listened to these people, you can either dismiss them as lunatics and liars, or you can believe what they're saying. And there are definitely lunatics and liars out there, but these people, uh, they must all have banded together and decided to hoax this cryptid thing because they're all on the same page. And it's you're definitely right about them being connected, and the UFO connection with it is very real.
That's like old school National Enquirer headlines there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot of people want to just dismiss it as that, and you're crazy and kooky and whatever. But
Throw in Elvis and Hitler, and you got the whole
exactly,
thing.
exactly. Yeah, it's like you said, all these accounts with the same circumstances in each one, and they all kind of back each other up and link credence to one another. And this, like you said, either they are coming from people all over the world and they are seeing these things, or a large group of people just decided to, or not even a large group of people, they're just sending in stories
Right.
and posting stories online, different location, same things. It's like, what's more likely, that all these random people just got together and decided, hey, let's hoax the whole world, or these things are actually happening? I mean, you listen to people on Vic Cundiff's show. They call in and they talk about this stuff, and you can hear it in their voices. You can hear it in how they talk and describe seeing dog. I listen to the Dogman channel, his Dogman channel, and you can just hear it in their voices. The people that write into Steve Ishtal, you can't hear it in their voices, but what they say is the same thing that other people from across the world, that they don't even know, that they're all seeing the same thing. It's the same. It's like with David Paulides. People complain that his books are boring because it's the same stuff over and over, and he's like, yeah, that's the whole point. It's that
Right.
that's what lends credence to these things, is that the same things are happening. It's not like one thing happens and it's the same as this other, but they're at the complete opposite ends of the spectrum as to the circumstances around it. It's like, when things happen over and over the same way, there's something to it. It's not made up at that point. It just lends credence to the other stories.
There's no unicorns being talked about. No one's talking about flying crocodiles. No one is talking about flying snakes, or the stuff is very focused. What's being reported, very focused. Even the Vic Cundiff thing you mentioned, more and more in my mind, that is the kicker. Because if somebody wants to scoff, I tell them, go look at Vic Cundiff's channel. You will see 400 episodes of individuals that have called in and told their stories in an hour or more that they've experienced. And many of these people are relating multiple experiences. So it's well over 400. I've listened to over half of those 400, and I'm still working on it. And you get about 20 or 30 in, and you realize there's a lot of stuff lining up. People talking about the same thing. They're describing it. People from Australia, people from New Zealand, people from Europe and Scotland, and people from England, people from Canada, people from South Brazil, people from all over the United States. They're all in it together, describing the same traits. I mean, that's no, thank you. I'm not. I don't accept that. And
Right.
You add it all in. You add it all in that people are going missing, and I just don't. I'm not an ostrich, and I'm not going to behave like an ostrich. People can call me crazy if I want, but so be it. I know that the enemy exists, and that the dark side very much exists, and that they're very multifaceted. They're not. It's not just demons out there. There's fallen angels, there's powers, principalities, and all sorts of other beings that are out there. And Charles Darwin's version of reality is not my version. I'm sorry. It's just, and if other people want to accept that, that's fine. but don't come crying to us when all of a sudden the picture on your wall flies off in the middle of the night because something's just banged on the side of the wall and you don't know what it is.
Going back to what you were saying about that story about the young man who overdosed, that's an amazing story that I think we should dedicate a whole episode to, maybe more.
Yeah.
Just the topics that we could talk about on that one. That is truly an amazing story. But him, that stuck out to me too when he was in hell and he was describing the creatures and the different types of beasts that that were there. And I'm just sitting there thinking, yeah, I mean, that part didn't surprise me because
Nope.
I've gone down the rabbit hole with the cryptid thing, and I listened to Steve Ishtal and I listened to Vic Cundiff, and I do my own research, and I find and read and listen to stories that they don't do, and that it just didn't surprise me at all. I'm like, okay, yeah, I mean, the devil has many minions in his army, just like God has his angels and in his army. The devil has his minions, but they're not angels. They're not angels. And the fact that, even in the Bible in Noah's days, they were experimenting with different creatures and putting them together. It's like, well, what do you think they were doing? They're building an army. They're actually literally building an army. So these right. things, they're all on that team. And just the fact that he described them in hell when he had his near-death experience, it just confirmed it for me. So
we'll have to maybe do that for another next episode.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of near-death things that we can go into, a lot of stories where people come back and they write books and about going to heaven and going to hell. And this guy's story, I think, it was God. It was God, and his purpose was to come back to warn people. And he talks about how all he wants to do now is know Jesus. And there's a reason why. There's a reason he went to hell. There's a reason he's back, and it's to talk about it. And I think that'd be a great thing to do for our next episode. I think
sure.
I think we're about done with this one. We'll probably revisit this topic at some point. But yeah, I think next episode we're going to go into that young man's story. I think he's 20 years old now. I think he said he was 18 when he had that near-death experience. And there's other stories we can talk about too, but mainly focus on that one because that's one amazing story that really resonated with me. But yeah, was there anything you wanted to add before we wrap this one up?
That's it.
All right. Well, we don't do this for the views. We don't do this for the likes. We don't do this to try to get as many clicks and likes and subscribers as possible. If you'd like to subscribe, that'd be great. We'd love to have you, but that's not why we do this. We just try to spread the word that God, or spread the message that God gives to us to put out there. And he brought us together for, if you haven't listened, I don't know, I think we talked about it in the very first episode, how you were a catalyst for me in my journey, and I was a catalyst for you that reignited your passion for this. So we really feel like God brought us together for this purpose, to spread his message, to spread his word, and to get it out there and to warn as many people as possible, because you want to do it. And we're definitely going to go in to that in the next episode, because I've already made notes on that story because I knew we'd be covering it. Do it now. Get right with God now before it's too late. And we will definitely go over this in the next episode. You do not get a second chance. Right. And that is the best cliffhanger I think I could think of to leave for, going into that story for next episode. Get right with God now, because you do not get a second chance. But back to what I was saying, we just want to spread God's word. We want to try, we want to try to save as many people as possible. But if we just convert one person, if we get one person to dedicate or rededicate their lives to the Lord, then we've done our job. And right. That's what we're here for. We don't care about being YouTube famous. We don't care about being internet famous or getting as many subscribers as possible. That's that's the secondary thing. If we do get that many subscribers, it just means that we're getting the word out there and we're doing our job. But our main purpose here is to just try to save people. So yeah, definitely tune in next time, because we're going to be going into that story and some other near death experiences, both heaven and hell, and that should get very interesting very quick. But that's going to do it for this episode. Be sure to tune in to the next one. Thanks for watching. God bless.